Sometimes being sick is a full-time job. You get used to it.
My name is Stephanie, and I have chronic Lyme disease.
Okay. Oh, I should not have gone that fast. Okay, I can do this. Hello! All right.
I have two boys. Aiden is 9 and Jack is turning 6 in just a couple of days. They're my world.
It's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow.
Yep.
That's tomorrow.
My husband Bobby is he's Canadian, so he's very stereotypically Canadian. He is all smiles.
Mommy's gonna move up to a chair though. And then here. Don't even.
Come on.
I went through a pretty typical progression for Lyme disease. It started out very much like mono, just having really overwhelming chronic fatigue. Then I started having some pain in my joints and some physical issues. I was a very serious dancer in high school, and I just got clumsier. I couldn't keep up anymore. My body wouldn't bend in the same way. I had a lot of injuries. In the beginning, we didn't know what it was, so right away it was antidepressants. Lot of psychotherapy. Lot of maybe this is in my head. Maybe I am looking for attention. I started to have memory issues. I couldn't remember the material that I had learned in class the day before. It should have been an alarm bell, but again, it was, well, maybe she's just bored with high school and checking out. Then came the seizures that they called epilepsy. For a while, I had a doctor that looked at all of us and said, maybe you have lupus. That wasn't it. They started to talk about fibromyalgia because the more you have chronic fatigue and chronic pain, fibromyalgia kind of became the new end-all be-all diagnosis of, we can tell you're in pain, we just don't know why, so we'll call it this. After that, when I met my husband and we started trying to have children, we had a series of repeated unexplained miscarriages, again and again and again. We've had 7 miscarriages total to have our 2 children. And this is kind of how it went year to year, is I would get a new symptom and it would either be something that they'd go, well, that could be depression too, or it would be a new symptom like arthritis that they'd go, well, now we have another new diagnosis to add to the chart. So it either was written off or it was a series of growing side-by-side diagnoses that had nothing to do with each other. Nobody was taking a step back and saying, maybe there's a bigger picture problem that we're missing here.
Lyme disease is complicated because it's got multiple stages. And so unlike a lot of bacterial infections, Lyme disease changes the way it affects the person depending on how long it's been untreated. So the first stage of Lyme disease infection is where the bacteria causes the initial infection at the site of the tick bite in the skin, and that often, but not always, results in a round red skin lesion. In the first stage, if people don't have the characteristic rash, they almost always get diagnosed with a virus. And they're often told it's a virus and it'll go away on its own, which viruses do go away on their own. Unfortunately, if they're misdiagnosed, the bacterial infection of Lyme disease doesn't go away on its own. And so the patient is reassured, they're told it's a virus, it'll get better on its own, and then weeks pass and then months pass and they're still not better.
I had one doctor insinuate that maybe some part of me wants to be sick, maybe for attention or for love or to keep people in my life. So maybe I'm sort of making myself sick somehow to bring all of this to myself. For 15 years, I knew something was wrong with me, but when you hear it enough times, you can't help but start to believe it a little bit. There's part of your brain that's going, maybe I am just crazy. Maybe I am just making this up. I am a very extroverted, outgoing personality type. I did musical theater and all of these things for years. Maybe I am just dramatic. I went to my doctor at the time and said, I have this suspicion of Lyme. Here's the research. Here's the reason. Could we throw a Lyme test in since we're testing all these other things? I was essentially told that my insurance didn't see that as a necessary test, so I could get it, but we'd have to pay for it out of pocket. So we did. The first time I held a piece of paper in my hand that says, no, there's a thing that is wrong with you, and a test that you can't fake to prove it, you feel justified, you feel validated. The first wave that hits you is nothing to do with maybe there's a cure then. The first wave that hits you is, I knew it. I knew it. I was sick. I am sick. I'm not crazy. This is real.
I think there could be the tendency for women to be stereotyped that they're just anxious and depressed no matter what their symptoms are. In fact, historically, that was often assumed that women's symptoms were due to hysteria. And I think there is a risk that women may be brushed aside as having just anxiety or depression accounting for their symptoms. And remember, again, these symptoms of Lyme disease overlap with anxiety and depression, fatigue, brain fog, sleep disruption. Those symptoms are common in Lyme disease, but also common in depression.
So when we finally understood it was Lyme and I could get treatment, there was antibiotics, there were immunotherapies, lots of supplements, cups full of supplements, dietary changes, but ultimately, no matter how much work you do to treat Lyme, when you've had it for 15 years, that's bacteria that's just growing and growing and taking over in your system.
Dad, sit in your chair, please. They're not going to bite you. Do you want orange juice or milk? Orange juice.
Some of that damage is just not fixable. My life today looks a lot different because I'm on medications that are helping me with energy so that we can pretend I don't have Lyme. And because the arthritis has improved to the point where I don't usually need my mobility cane, sometimes I do, depends a lot on the weather.
Thank you so much. Perfect.
On a day-to-day basis, I can walk around now and masquerade pretty well as a perfectly healthy person. If you didn't know me, you often wouldn't know. A lot of the tricks and hacks and things that I have to do to get through the day are not things you'd see. I shower on a stool so that I can shower seated because I can't make it through a whole shower standing and do my day. It's one or the other. We bought this thing that holds up my hair dryer for me because it sounds silly, but holding a 5-pound hair dryer over your head for 20 minutes, it hurts. I'm having to learn how to create all new systems and patterns and habits of what it looks like to live life as a healthier person. I have a beautiful office. I don't write there. Sitting in a desk chair for more than 20 minutes or so, it's not really feasible for me. The pain level is just too high. So I write from the bed. I think I would have been treated completely differently if I had been male. So much of why they missed the connections between symptoms for so long absolutely has to do with my gender. My husband's been sick. My husband's been to the ER. He's feeling run down and more fatigued these days and age. And not once do they ever suggest to him, let's look at your mental health first.
Yeah, measure how far to go to planets.
A lot of fatigue was, well, yes, I mean, you're a mommy, so of course you have fatigue. And I'm trying to talk about, I can't get out of bed 4 days a week. And it was still, well, have you tried another cup of coffee in the morning? And nobody says that to my husband. He's never once had them say, well, you have children. They don't ask him, yes, but how is your home life going when he comes in for a physical problem? I got that every time. When we're talking about pain, that's where it gets hardest as a woman. Because if you go into an emergency room in an extreme amount of pain and you show that you are in an extreme amount of pain, the number one feedback you get is that you are being hysterical. And the more they use that word hysterical, the more it seems like you're really being dramatic here. And now I'm not really listening to you.
But where's the special donut?
Oh, you think there's a special donut? Well, but you're little, so do you want that one?
No.
You don't want that one?
Donut.
Oh, did you want this donut? Oh my god!
The only thing that is somewhat important to me to make sure I say anytime I talk about my story with chronic illness or living with disability is that as hard as it was for me, I'm white, I was fairly able-bodied for a lot of this journey, and I was middle, upper class and had a really good education. All of those things played into the fact that I ended up getting an answer and that I'm doing better now. There are a lot of people who have similar stories to mine that do not have endings like mine. There was a lot of privilege here that got me to that point.
Yay! Good job, bud.
There's a lot of intersections here of, yes, there is a bias against women, but it gets really layered. Women of color have it exponentially worse, and all the research backs up their numbers are far worse. Women of size, even worse than that.
Is it?
A Harry Potter book.
I think when you do get a diagnosis, if one thing it really does positively do is it gives you permission to go, okay, there's something, it's real. So I don't need to keep banging my head at the wall trying to be normal. Like, this is my life, I have a thing, I know that for sure now. What can I do to make that life livable? Like a Lyme disease life livable?
Ah!